Another process is that the more nations care about self-enhancing values, the less they care about pro-social values. Remember Schwartz's model. There's a lot of information up here. I don't want you to pay attention to it all. Here are the achievement, power, self-enhancing values. They're consistent with each other, which is why they're next to each other. This is based on statistics, okay? Up here, look at what they oppose. Universalism. Universalism is caring about the well-being of the broader world. The more a nation cares, the more a person cares about maximizing their own self, the less they're going to care about benefiting other people. That's what the values research shows. I'm going to skip the limitations except to say that these data are correlational, so we have to be careful about making causal conclusions, but that's true of any cross-national study. In conclusion, we've got pretty good cross-national support for why we're all here. But I would propose, and those of you who are at the session that Alan and I ran, is that these data suggest that we can fight marketing to kids, and we can fight marketing to kids, but that's just the proximal environment in which kids exist. And there's a bigger distal environment out there that we need to pay attention to. And in terms of solutions, I think we need to talk with other organizations who have similar concerns about that distal environment. Maybe they don't care about marketing to kids, but they care about other things that capitalism is doing that are bad for the world. And if we can join with them and start working together overall on that distal environment, we may find that we'll have more success for the proximal environment issue that we're most concerned about. Thank you.
It isn't a question, it's a challenge to all of us. First of all, thank you so much for doing this work. It just sort of helps some of us go back with it and be able to sort of say, see? We've heard in a lot of workshops and in plenaries that we need to create these across the aisle, to use the metaphor, coalitions, that we need to reach out to organizations that perhaps don't usually align with, us kind of lefties in the room and all that. I want to challenge everybody, myself included, to think about and then make a connection with a religious organization that maybe is in your neighborhood, or with that PTA group that you haven't gone to, or some organization that does care about this that you haven't connected with before, and start having these conversations, because we've said this so many times that we need to reach into those odd bedfellows, and I think if we don't start doing that individually, it's just isn't going to happen.
I totally agree. I think we have to build as a coalition, and that means reaching out to people who maybe aren't totally focused on exactly what we are, but we can find that common ground and we can work together to work against the broader issues that are out there. So I totally agree, and and we can help them too, not just have them help us. Uh-oh.
I just want to thank you for that, and I want to point out that in Britain, over the past few months, there's been some amazing work, a lot of it coming from the National Teachers Union, looking at materialism in children, looking about the sexualization of children, and in all of that work and in all of the reporting on that work, they are making the link to this UNICEF data and what's going on and what's wrong with the children in Britain. So I think it's wonderful that, as far as I know, this is the first time anybody's making that connection here, so thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I was actually in Britain at the time. I was there for a fellowship for a month, and that's when I came across the UNICEF data. And they were worked up, but I don't know that people were worked up in America that we were second to last. And to me, that's really sad.
Thank you. Also, I have a quick comment and then a question. And the comment is actually, I was listening to you talk about using Bronfman-Reynolds' model with this issue, and I thought about Gail's lecture earlier and the issue of sexualization, and we could also apply Bronfman-Reynolds' model to that if we look at rates of child abuse, and I don't know if that's been done, but I thought that a good thing that we could do is rates higher, the hypothesis would be are rates of child abuse higher if in, you know, that distal environment promotes those kind of porn culture and values that we've got?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent idea. You know, there's a lot that can be done with Bronfenbrenner's model. The problem is sample size. You know, I really should have done structural equation modeling. If you're a statistician, you know that. I don't have the sample size, and we need the good cross-national data.
And then my question is, the other piece of his model is, you know, the exosystem, which is the systems that children are not directly involved in, but are impacted by them. For example, a parent's, you know, workplace. And you, in your lecture, I think yesterday, you mentioned, what if we were a time affluent society? So the question is, you know, just in thinking, what might be some other things in those exosystem environments that could also kind of help the issue, which one of them might be parents' work?
Well, and actually, I'm writing a paper right now for the Journal of Cross-Cultural Psychology where I'm presenting a variation on this talk. But the other variable that is in there, and that I do have for 20 different nations, is the parental leave policies of the different nations. And what you find is that the United States and Australia basically are one of the few economically developed nations in the world, much less among wealthy nations, but that essentially have no paid parental leave, none, that's mandatory. So I do think that that's a big issue, and it's correlated with marketing, and which makes sense in some ways. You know, the parents are stressed; they're too stressed to fight back against this, and I think that's a huge issue. Parents are worn out, and that's why they're setting their kids in front of these TVs. Thank you.
We have time for one more question.
Okay.
Hi, thank you again for the data and in the theme of comment and question. So in public health, there's a lot of talk about the environment, you know, social environment, and it's one of my pet peeves that we use that word to kind of obscure what's really going on. I know you're talking about, you know, an economic political system, and I just feel like we need to talk more in that language and in terms of, you know, who the architect of the environment is, and that capitalism and corporations are the one that have created this environment. So that's my little soapboxy thing. But I wanted to ask, because from a public health perspective, if you did this presentation at a public health conference, they'd all be screaming, correlation does not equate causation. So I'm wondering if the data that you looked at, you know, tries to get at intervening variables and all that stuff, the public health people have talked about.
Well, that's why I would need a bigger sample size in order to do structural equation modeling, first off. And to be honest, the holdup in many respects is the marketing variable. I've only got that for 12 nations. There was another variable I had that was restrictions, what kinds of restrictions were there in the different nations, but I didn't trust it. I didn't trust the methodology of how it was developed, so I didn't really believe it. But it all boils down to sample size in order to do that kind of stuff. That said, to do cross-national data at an experimental level is, unless they're willing to make me dictator of 30 nations, is really just impossible to do the true experimental data or analyses needed to make any causal conclusions, because even longitudinal data won't do that. So that's always going to be a limitation of this kind of research. Thank you again.